All right, well, Christopher's not back, I don't think yet, but, oh, he is there. I didn't see it. You had your head down. That's why I was waiting. Okay, good. All right, on page 257 of the book, that is not on this PDF I have, but it's an important page. On that page, they talk about the box sizing property. As it says, it causes the browser calculation of the width or height to include the content's actual width or height in addition to any height or width of any padding or any border. That's important, and that will be important for the assignment that I will hand out ideally after your next break. All right? Very bottom of the page, the author mentioned it is common practice for web developers to apply border box sizing when they plan to use floated elements or multi-column layouts. All right. So, that said, if you look at the picture, again, this is the picture that they show here in figure 613, and of course that's the only one that they show on here. But if you look in your book on page 258, you see both figure 613 and figure 614. Figure 613 is what we've been doing so far. Everything that we've been creating has been a single column layout. Starting in this chapter, we are introduced to a multi-column layout, starting with just a two-column layout. Now, in the olden days, again, I guess we do have a picture. In the olden days, this is how it was set up. When I say the olden days, I mean a few years ago. All right, that's usually what you saw, where you saw the navigation over here. But now it has changed over time so that the navigation is more where it's up on the top. All right, now that doesn't mean that you can't do it the other way. You can. If we look at the example that they have here on the page, if you look on my screen, this is a two-column layout. There's a column, there's a column. All right, you have your choice when you do this two-column layout. Do you want the column to extend all the way down like they're doing it here? Or do you want it only to extend up to, in other words, we could have taken this header and we could have extended that out here. We could have taken the footer and extended. Does that make sense to everyone? You have control of all that stuff when you set it up. All right? So if you look at your hands-on practice 6.3, which is on pages 258, 259, 260, and 261, you'll notice that what you start doing there in step A is they show you a single column layout. That shouldn't be new to you. That's very similar to the type of thing you did for your last test. All right? Then they come in and they start changing, as you can see on page 259, so you're entering a column in. Now in the first one, they've got a nav, as it says, that's floating to the left, but technically that first example they show there isn't a two-column layout. All right? When they configure two columns using CSS, now it really is a two-column layout. Again, I would strongly suggest, hint, hint, for your hands-on test next week that you go through and at least review these. All right? Do them if you have time, but at least take a look at them. Then on the next page, you'll notice if you look on page 260, and again, unfortunately I don't have it on the overhead here, but notice in figure 618, that is true two-column layout. You will notice that the navigation extends only up to the bottom of the header area and extends downward only to the top of the footer area. Can everybody see that? Again, if you wanted to, you could have had it extend all the way up. All right, very similar to what I'm showing you here. I'd say that what they show in the book here on page 260 is much more reflective of the way it typically is going to be. Good, I did turn it on. All right, so next they go through a two-column layout example, and they literally, starting on page 261, are building this from scratch. All right? So it's a 2-column layout example, and it says the web page that you coded in the hands-on practice is just one example of a 2-column layout. Let's explore another 2-column layout. So it looks very similar. The example that you see on page 261 in figure 619 and figure 620 both look very similar to what we just looked at. Does everybody understand, and you had that on your test, that what you see there in figure 619, that's a wireframe. So that's just a sketch somebody did. There literally is software that you can buy, some of it I think is even free, that'll create wireframes like this for you. Okay? Then what they're showing you in figure 620 is what the completed one will look like. Now, why is that important? It's not so much that it is, but what I want to mention to you about figure 620 are a few things. First of all, when you look at at 619 and 620, let's just start with 619. Maybe you'll notice how the header extends all the way, but the footer doesn't. See what I'm talking about? You might show that in a wireframe to your end user, and they might say, no, I want them both to extend, or I want neither to extend. That's the time to do stuff like that. What you want to do is you want to be able to show the end user somewhat what your site is going to look like. All right? Sometimes that's known as a prototype, because you're showing it what it'll look like, but it doesn't have the bells and whistles. In other words, it doesn't have the functionality, but you can show them what it'll look like. They may turn around and say, I like the way the header looks, but I want the footer to extend all the way also. Okay? Another thing, do you notice? Look at figure 620. Does this make sense to everyone? The background color in 620 is that navy. Does that make sense? Then you've got some kind of a div inside of there that probably is called container or something like that, and that div holds the header, the footer, the content, and the navigation. Does that make sense? Because it's really important that you realize that. All right. FAQ, middle of page 261. The author says there, again on the middle of the page, does the order of floated and non-floated elements matter? All right, it says a key to coding successful layouts is code the element that needs to float before its other elements, even if it means not putting it in the right order. Again, if you go through this practice or this exercise that's in here, it'll give you a much better idea of how this stuff is all set up. Next, do you have to use a wrapper? Well, everything that you see that's inside of, in figure 620, the header, the nav, the main, and the footer, those are all probably in a wrapper. All right? Sometimes it's called container. In fact, a little later on this semester, we'll go into a package that's called Bootstrap, and Bootstrap always, your outer div is always called container. Okay? All right, it says here on the top of 262, there's one more aspect of a 2-column layout to consider before it's ready for prime time. The navigation area is a list of hyperlinks. All right, and again, typically you'll make them in a bunch of unordered lists. In an unordered list, guess what? We've already started doing this, right? We've already started looking at this and how it's done. All right, now I want to quickly check something in here. And I know it's in a later chapter, but I want to see if they talk about it in this chapter. So just bear with me for about 15 to 30 seconds. Okay, it's not discussed in this chapter. But many web developers find that working with floats is one of the most complex things, having your floats set up correctly, etc., that you can do with web pages. I'm just telling you. All right? So, what has happened over the years is there is now something else that you can use that is called Flexbox. All right? And if you go out to this, I'm just going to show you this article. You don't have to read it. We will be talking about Flexbox in a later chapter, but I'm going to bring it up on here so at least you see it. And if you have an interest, you might want to take a look at it if and or when you get some time. All right, again, you say, I don't have time. Then don't do it. All right? But it's from a site that's actually called CSSTricks.com. And it's called, as you can see, a guide to Flexbox. Or the actual title is A Complete Guide to Flexbox. It is an alternative to having to use float left, float right, clear float, etc. Clears. It's another way of doing things. And it's becoming an accepted way of doing things. All right? And what I'm saying is many developers today are just, as much as possible, throwing away using floats and are just using Flexbox. We will hit on that in a later chapter. All right. So, hyperlinks in an unordered list. One of the advantages of using CSS for page layout involves the use of semantically correct code. So, a couple things about this. Some of this we've looked at, some of it we probably have not. Remember the list style type? Those are your possibilities. Typically, you won't want anything on a navigation bar. So you'll typically set list style type to none. Does that make sense? So if it's unordered list, you won't have a disk or a circle or a square. You won't have any of those. All right? These are all for the ordered list, and you should now all understand the difference between decimal, upper alpha, and lower Roman. There's also an upper Roman. I don't know why that's not in there. Okay? List style image. It is possible that if you are going to use this, that you don't want to use a disk or a circle or a square. Maybe you've seen this where sometimes people will use something like a double greater than sign. Or they have their own image. Maybe it's a star or something like that. So you can come in and you can use your own image on this if you want to. And list style position, as it says, configures the placement. All right, so why does that even matter? Well, let's look at this. As they say here, they show you some examples of this, and they show you an example of using the square, using uppercase, and using a custom. All right, using a custom image in figures 621, 622, and 623. Now, is that important? Draw your own conclusions. What I think is important is what's shown on the bottom half of page 263. First, they show a navigation in an unordered list. You've seen this kind of thing already. That, it's figure 624, and it's on the screen. You've seen this. All right? Figure 625, what's the difference? We took away the bullet points, but it is still vertical in its orientation. All right? And then in figure 620, here in the book at least, I guess it's 26 in your book, but now we have taken away and we've said text decoration none. I'm going to assume that you all know how to turn off the underline for hyperlinks, and that you all, if you're going to be creating a nav bar like this, you all know how to do it. So if you need review, you can go in and look on 263, and then turning it to 264 in your book, that adds the horizontal navigation. So what did they do? All right, they configured it, the CSS, and they configure it in steps to show you what they're doing on all of page 264 and on the top of page 265 in your book. So what you want is something that looks like this. So as it says, the first thing we did was we said list style type none, which got rid of any bullets that were in there. All right, notice it's a little confusing because that is doing it on the nav bar, but on the UL. That's everything that applies. So by default, an unordered list by default has bullets. Does that make sense? You're saying turn them off. Then you're saying for each individual list item, display it inline. All right, that means don't put any blanks, don't have each one on their own line. But one is a nav UL, one is a nav UI. And it'll get even more intricate than this when we get into this in some more depth and breadth of coverage. Then finally, the text decoration none. That is what? That is each of the anchor links. So not only are we doing text decoration none, we're putting a little bit of padding to the right of each one, so they're not pushed together. All right. One thing we have not looked at yet is what's shown in figures 6, 7 on page 265 in your book. What you see on the table here in your book on 265 and right here on the screen are what are called CSS Pseudo Classes. You may or may not know the verbiage, but pseudo actually implies false. Okay? Notice that there are 4 of these. There's link, which is the default for a hyperlink when you have not clicked it yet. Visited, which is the default for a visited hyperlink. Trigger, all right, when the link has the focus. Hover, when the mouse pointer is over the link. And active, when the link is actually being clicked. Now, if you want to really play head games with a person, you could put 5 different colors in here. So depending on when they were doing something with a link, there would be 5 different colors. You should all know this by default, that if I've got a hyperlink I haven't clicked yet, it's blue by default, right? And it also has the underline. Even when I take my mouse and click it, I think it's still blue. Once I've visited a site, that turns purple. Now, many people are happy with that, comfortable with that, etc. But you might find that a company wants to use different colors.
I'm looking for Charles, sorry.
Oh, he's right next door.
No, he's not there.
Oh, okay. But what, so many people are happy with the defaults, but some companies don't, they want their things to be a certain color. Maybe the color, maybe they want their hyperlinks to be the color of their background or whatever it happens to be. I don't know. All right. One of the things that we'll talk about I don't think it's in this chapter, but in a later one, have you ever noticed too that when you put your mouse over a hyperlink, it turns usually into like a finger? You can change that too if you don't like it. You can have it show anything you want. All right. In fact, there's even things in Windows. You can go into your Windows settings. I did this just for the hell of it. I created this hockey site, and I changed it so whenever you highlighted anything, it became a hockey puck. All right. But then after a while, people were telling me it was too hard to read. So I just changed it back to the way it was, but, naturally. All right. Now notice they mention right underneath the figure here, it says the order. So if you're going to do link and visited and focus and hover and active, etc., you must do them in this order. Because if you don't, one will override the other one. So the order of these matters. Do you have to use all of them? You don't have to use any of them. You can use any 1, any 2, any 3, any 4, or all 5. So there is another hands-on practice with this on pages 266 and 267, and then one that follows on 267 and 268. All right? And again, since you're going to have some time today, I would suggest, I'm going to give you the assignment after we take our next break and go over it a little bit, but I would suggest before you start your assignment, I would go through these. Now, if you say, well, I don't want to, I just want to, then don't. All right. Then there's another hands-on practice that starts on 268, and it's practice with a 2-column layout. So they have you literally create a 2-column layout on 268, 269, 270, and 271. All right. So you'll notice that much of this chapter is just literally, it's practice after practice after practice. All right. It's like any other skill. I've been trying for years, maybe you saw this when I brought this up before, I've been trying for years to teach myself to play guitar. And I've got everything but the patience to do it. All right, I start on it, I get really frustrated, I just put it away. All right, so my wife thought, I'll make sure he does this. So she went out and bought me a really good guitar. And I was real good with it for a couple weeks, and then now it's been collecting dust. All right, so it's like anything else. If you want to get good, you have to just keep practicing it. And not only that, if you go through these practices, I can virtually guarantee it's going to help a lot when you take the test next week. All right. That said, if you say, well, I don't want to, then you're not going to. There's nothing I can say to make you do it. I wouldn't anyway. All right. Bottom of 271, header text image replacement. So sometimes a client may have a specific typeface other than the web-safe font that they would like to use for their header section. In this situation, it's common for a graphic designer to configure a header banner that shows that. What the heck does that mean? That means that it's possible that somebody manually created what you see right here. And they love the way that typeface looks, but you go and you look online and you can't find one. You go out to Google Fonts and you can't find one. So they provide it for you. So in other words, you would have literally an image that would have both the graphic and the text on it. All right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. The only problem is if they want that used throughout the site, that type of font, either you're going to have to find it, all right, or you're going to have to create it yourself. On page 272 in your text, they say a popular technique is what's known as header text image replacement. All right? And notice, same guy that I showed you with Flexbox. Same person, Chris Coyer at CSSTricks.com. It says it allows you to configure a header banner image that displays text and an H1 element that displays text. Bottom line is this. It's another way of doing things. If you want to try doing that, there's a hands-on practice on pages 272 and 273. All right? Speaking of page 273, on the bottom of the page, and it goes on to the next several pages, practice with an image gallery. All right? We got into images in Chapter 4. There will be images on your next hands-on test. There will be images that you will need to put in on your assignment for Chapter 6. So it says you have previously used an unordered list to configure a list of navigation hyperlinks. Since a bunch of navigation hyperlinks can be considered a list, the unordered list structure is semantically correct way to code hyperlinks on a web page. Let's apply this to a gallery of images. So they have this. This can be done in a lot of different ways, just so you know. As an example, if we look on here, and this is page 274 in your book, let's say that we thought, this isn't bad, but I wish I could put more images in here. Guess what? You already know what that means. You make thumbnails. All right? You can set these up so that they are the way they are, or you can set them up so each one of them is a hyperlink so that when you click on any of them, it opens up an image that takes up the whole screen on your page. All right? They get into some of that stuff in the hands-on practice that's on 274 and 275. Now, you might say, well, why aren't we going through these as a class? No, because everybody does this in a different, way, learns it in a different way, gets comfortable with it in a different way. The only way that you become proficient with it is to sit and play with it. All right? So, turning up to page 276, probably the second most important part of the chapter. All right? And this is 276, 277, and then there's a hands-on on 278, 279, and 280. And it's on positioning. And you'll notice, if we look at the chart, table 6.6, that is in your book on 276, and also on the screen here, there are 4 types of positioning. They are static, fixed, relative, and absolute. And I can guarantee you that 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these will make its way onto your next written test. All right? I'm not even sure when we will take the hands-on, or the written test rather, for Chapter 6. Possibly like next Tuesday. And then Monday I'll take a half an hour and we'll go through the test review as we've been doing. All right. But it says, when you use CSS for a page layout, there are situations where you want almost absolute control over how one or more elements are positioned on a page. To do that, you use the position property, which configures the type of positioning. Notice that static is the default, it's normal flow. Fixed, the element does not move when the page is scrolled. All right? Does it make sense to you when you look at this? Look at the screen right now. See how I'm going up, etc.? Now this isn't with CSS, but hopefully you notice that the stuff on top there isn't moving. So quite often you might want something, maybe a logo or something, maybe the nav bar, maybe something else. You don't want it to move. All right? If you want to make sure something stays in a fixed position at all times, you can use the fixed property. One place where this is really commonly used is sometimes people want their footer to always be fixed to the bottom of the screen. Even if your page is really small, they don't want the footer, like if you only have this much text, they don't want the footer right underneath it. They want a little bit of text, but they want the footer still down here. All right? So you can use fixed positioning to do that. Then there's relative positioning. That'll become even more important in later chapters, but it configures the location of an element relative to where it would otherwise render in the normal flow. Then there's absolute positioning. All right? So if I say I want an image to be at, position, start in position 100 to the right and 100 down, it's always right there and it never moves. All right? That's what's at that position. So they give you their own definitions here of static, fixed, and relative on the rest of the page, but I just went over them with you. All right? There's also, notice that you can use this position left, position right, etc. All right? So they mention here on page 277 in the book, your figure 643, and it's up here as figure 635 on the screen. The author says this shows a web page that uses relative positioning with the left property to configure the placement of an element in relation to the normal flow. So again, what we're saying is if you want absolute control over where something is positioned, how it's positioned, and whether or not it moves as the user scrolls his or her way through the web page, you can use these positioning properties. All right. Absolute position is shown on the bottom of 277, and it goes up to page 278. And it says you can use that to precisely specify the location of an element outside of the normal flow. So again, there is a practice with this on 278, 279, and the top of page 280. And again, I know after a while, because I've had people even write this on their course evaluations, man, you sound like a frickin' broken record. You really should do this, but I can't make you do it, and that's true. But I'm going to keep saying it anyway. All right? I think the people who are the most successful in this class are the people who take the time or make the time, all right, to go through, and if they know that they're deficient in something, that they don't get something, they go through the practice exercises. That's one of the reasons we use this book. Is it the best book? Hell no. But it's one of the best books I've seen for having practice exercises in it. All right, just a couple more pages. We've got, about 6 more pages and we're done with the chapter. Debugging techniques, page 280. You ever heard the story of debugging? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are no. There was a woman back in the 60s. She was a rear admiral in the Navy. Her name was Grace Hopper. She was about 4.5 feet tall. This is the story, at least. That was back in the days when computers had the big cathode ray tubes in them and stuff, and everybody programmed in machine language. Well, she went and wrote a program, and she was getting wrong output. Couldn't figure out why. Double-checked her stuff, double-checked it, ran it again, still getting the wrong output. Couldn't figure out the problem. Took the back of the computer out, and somehow a dead moth was lodged into the computer. And it was screwing things up and making it not work. Took it out, it worked. That was the first computer bug. The act of taking it out was the first debugging. All right, now errors that you find in your stuff are known as bugs. You getting rid of those errors is known as you debugging. All right, so they give you some hints. You should really start by making sure, before you even start writing your CSS, you should run your HTML through the validator to make sure that it's valid. All right, after you write your CSS, you should validate it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with writing a little CSS, validating it, writing a little more CSS, and validating. The best way to program, and Colin has had another class with me, so he can tell you that I've said this before. If you've got a big job to do, don't do all of it and then test it. Do a piece and then test it. Do another piece and then test it. All right? Keep doing it incrementally like that. You'll have much more luck. Configure temporary background colors. This is going to become important. So if, in other words, if I'm trying to set up my page so it looks kind of like this, I want something here, and it's not looking the way I want it to look. I can take this div and make it green. I can take this div and make it yellow. I can take this div and make it black, as an example, and look at it that way with temporary colors. If you don't want to do that, you might want to do stuff with borders. And they mention that on the bottom of the page. Also, any place that you think it's fit to do so, add comments. All right. The author says on the bottom of page 281, where do you go if you want more information about CSS? And there are some sites that you can go to. All right. All right. Starting on page 282. And there is a practice on 282, 283, and 284 on this. For whatever reason, she decided to talk about some of the other elements that you have, all right? Some of the other elements that are HTML5 elements. So a section element, an article element, an aside element, and a time element. Again, I'm not sure why she decided to put them right here at the end of a chapter, but she did. All right, so let's quickly look at what they mean. A section element is like a section of a document. All right. So, what does that mean? It can mean anything you want it to mean, literally. All right. An article. Typically, sections contain articles. There's other people who believes that articles contain sections. So most people know how to use these things, but no one really has total agreement on how to use them. Okay? So an article is intended to be an independent entry. An aside. With all the stuff that's happened lately with Hurricane Harvey, if you ever were to open up your, I know a lot of these, what's a newspaper? But if you get a newspaper and you look at it, they've got all this stuff about Hurricane Harvey. All right? Then along the side, they have a special story about, somebody who drove from St. Louis and they drove out to Texas to do some relief. You know what I'm talking about? Like a little extra story. That's called an aside in a newspaper, and that's basically what you do here too. Typically an aside will be off to the left or off to the right. Okay? It's something that's known as being tangential. So in other words, it's related to the other content, but not directly related. All right, so that's an aside. Finally, there's a time element that you can use, and it'll allow you to put in the date and or the time. So if you go through the practice exercise that's on 282 and 283, you'll do some of that stuff. All right, and 284. All right, finally, on 285 and 286, the last two pages of the chapter. HTML5 compatibility with older browsers. You remember the site caniuse.com? That's always the best one to use when you want to check out any of this stuff. It's not even listed in here. But the author is saying if you're using older browsers, If somebody says to you, you got to support everything. All right? This may or may not make sense to you looking at it. This is in your book on page 285 at the top of the page. What this says is if you see these tags and you don't understand what they mean, all right, just make them block tags. So in other words, even if you don't know what they mean, make sure there'll be a line after them, okay? And you can also use what's called the HTML shim. I have never heard it called the shim. I always hear it called the shiv, not the shim, all right? But the idea behind that is what it literally is saying is, hey, if the browser doesn't understand what the tag means, for lack of better words, basically, just disregard it. All right? And that's it for the chapter. Now, we're going to take a break, but before we do, again, if you look up on the screen here, everybody, this says, okay, written test today, go over Chapter 6. We're now done with that. All right, tomorrow, written test Chapter 5, lab. You're going to get a 3-page lab after the break. So tomorrow is lab after we do the written test. Monday, lab the entire period. All right? In fact, let's say before that, what we'll do first thing Monday for the first half hour is we'll do the test review for the Chapter 6 written test. All right? The rest of the period will be lab. Tuesday, we'll take the written test. All right? And after we take the written test, the rest of the period will be lab. And then starting Wednesday of next week will be the written test. Now, he's got written test Chapter 6, but you better understand the stuff for Chapter 4 as well. All right? So let's take a break. It's 9:55. Let's come back at 10 after 10. And when we come back, we'll take 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it takes, to go over what your next assignment is. All right? All right, you all got a hard copy of this, and in addition, I also emailed you a copy of it today. So when you get all done, you will email it to me, and you don't even have to turn this in. You can keep this, okay? So the first page has got 3 parts to it. You are first to create a web page that looks similar to what you see right here. Now notice what it says. You can use any image from the internet but they have to all be the same size. Under each image, you should have a heading, and you should have a paragraph. So if you wanted to make something that was the equivalent of like a product page or something, you could do that. All right. If you like Pokemon, you could make, 8 different Pokemon characters. Whatever. It doesn't really matter. But there should be some symmetry to it, so they should all be the same size. Does that make sense? All right. Second, go out and read this article. Notice again, it's from CSSTricks.com. And if you look up on the screen here, because I've already also put it up on here, there it is. It's called All About Floats. And they explain what a float is, how to set up floats, etc. And I suppose if you do print it out, it's it's 101 pages, but it's not that big. They got comments up the wazoo on it. So it really is, I don't know, it looks like about 8 pages. All right. But it should give you a good or better understanding of what float is about. All right. Then for number 3, develop a simple, when I say a site, basically, we just want you to create something that looks like, if you look up on the screen, again, I've gone out to this URL, and that URL looks like this. All right. So notice if I come in here and I change this to 3, well, there is a way. I guess I have to download it. But if I do that, then this will be 3 columns. There we go. 3. That pretty obvious? All right. And you've got the stuff there, so hopefully that won't be too big of a stretch for anybody to work on. So that's the first page. The second page, which is for you, is the back of your first page. Looks like this. I would recommend that when you're doing this, again, this is my recommendation, that you use divs, or if you don't want to use divs, that you use headers or, header, footer, etc. But if you notice, here you've got what? 2, a content, and 3. Here you've got, this is almost what's in your book right there. Okay? I would use different colors on each one of them. You can put in text, you don't have to. If you make them look literally just like this, that's okay. The first assignment, I'm not going to go back to it, but that first one, making that little product page or whatever, that's 40 points. Doing the second one is 40 points, and doing the third one is 20 points. This one, 17 points each, or 102 points. Now, the whole thing is worth 300 points. You're like, well, that seems like a lot. And it is. So I'm going to ask Evan how he's doing it in his class. What we might end up doing is just dividing whatever you get for a total score by 3 and then making it out of 100. All right, so if you get 270, you get a 90. That kind of an idea. If he says he's going 300 points, then that's what I'm going to do. All right, so that's page 2. Page 3 you might find is the most work for you to do. You're going to create a site that, for lack of better words, looks like this one right there. Now, I made it small enough so it all show on the screen, but you've got it on your page so you can read that even though you can't really read it on here. But it should look similar to what you see on the screen. You can use any coloring you want in here. This does not have to have a red background, but it should have an image scroller. It should have navigation, on hover, a product gallery, and a footer. All right? Again, if you say, I don't even know how to start that, remember, not only do you have the rest of the period today, not only do you have tomorrow after we take the written test, not only do you have Monday after we do the review, not only do you have Tuesday, all right, and you also have Tuesday after we take the Chapter 6 written test. So you will have somewhere in the vicinity of 11 hours to work on this. Ideally, you won't have to do any work at home. You'll be able to do it all here. Now, people ask this question. All right, okay, raise your hand. Okay, Jeff, I'm going to take it home. If I get all of it done tonight, can I just not come Wednesday or Friday and then Monday? That's not how it works here. Be honest with you, where I used to work at the college I used to work at, I let people do that. All right? Because if somebody really had the wherewithal that they sat there and did a 3-day assignment in 1 day, typically what happened was with those people was that after a while people would figure out who they were and how smart they were. So if they'd come into class, they'd have everybody else hounding them for help. All right, they didn't like that, but that's not the way it works here. All right, so you are, and I'm honestly, I'm not saying this not to inflate anybody's ego or anything, but I'm very proud of you because Evan right now in St. Louis, he started with about 25 people, and as far as I can count, he's already at 7 people he's had to drop because they have not shown. All right, and now we're on what? Today is day 8. He's got, I saw 3 of them that came by today. They missed their 7th time. Okay, they're gone. All right, we had nobody miss here yet, which I think is great. All right, questions on any of this? Take a look at it. If you have questions, feel free to ask. All right, so written test tomorrow. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to take a couple things back to the office, but after I do that, I'm going to grade your tests that you took this morning for Chapter 4 and give those back to you. All right, I'm done talking.